Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have a privilege to lead the next panel. I would not pretend that I'm a specialist or expert in the topics that were given to me, but I strongly believe in my guests, so they should be an expert. So let me introduce. We got Martin Gundiga from Austrian Economic Center. He is the researcher in Austrian Economic Center. He's an economist and a tax expert. I heard that you were invited to the special panel of the Austrian government to advise them on the tax issues. So I'm very happy about that, because I also have some questions regarding the surveillance and the tax issues. So that's great that we are having you here. Then we got Professor Bartosz Brożek, Vice Dean of Law Faculty at the Jagiellonian University. Probably most of you know Professor Brożek, and he's a philosopher and lawyer. And one of the activity which is less well known is the Future Law Lab. So I believe that we can hear something about this initiative. Then we got Sebastian Stodołak, philosopher, economist, journalist, publisher in Dziennik Gazeta Prawna, Obserwator Finansowy, and he also published in Newsweek, Wprost, and some other papers and magazines in Poland. He's the president or vice president of the Warsaw Enterprise Institute. President or vice president, Sebastian? Vice president. Okay, sorry. So, but you look like president, so that's why I was... Okay. And we got, last but not least, John Chisholm, an economist, investor, MIT graduate, I think. Yes, you are an MIT, and you are still active in MIT society. I mean, what I read about you is that you still get in touch with those people. So you can combine the knowledge from the business perspective and scientific perspective. You know a lot about market, about investing. So I count on you, actually, in this panel. Oh, no, okay, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. So we are supposed to talk about technology and freedom, artificial intelligence, surveillance, and sharing economy. I have no idea who combined these topics to one subject, actually, but I hope that we can find something interesting in all of them. Right, so let us start maybe from the modern technology and freedom. I mean, in principle, we got an impression that the modern technology constitutes a threat to our liberties, to our rights, to our freedom. But I would like to start from the very philosophical question. I mean, freedom is an ambiguous concept. I mean, we may talk about the negative and positive freedom. As long as we are under the influence of the Austrian School of Economics, we usually speak about the negative freedom. But there is also the concept of the positive freedom. And for the positive freedom, the technology, the modern artificial intelligence may constitute a challenge, may constitute a chance for the betterment, for the better life. And Sebastian, you are the philosopher from your education. Maybe you can start to tell me something about this, whether you think that this division on positive and negative freedom has any sense, and what could be the impact of the modern technology of both kinds of freedom.
All right. Thank you for the question, Martin. So yes, this division makes sense. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. But I think that we usually, when we speak of it, we do not get a right sense of what the real meaning of this division is. So one follows from the other. Usually, when we think of it, we think of two separate kinds of freedom. Like there's this negative freedom, freedom from government, for example, freedom from coercion, and positive freedom, freedom to do something, to have something, to be something, whatever. So there is this, I would say, artificial division between those two notions, which we should eradicate. We should get rid of it. Actually, one follows from the other. And which follows from which? Of course, the positive freedom follows from negative freedom. First, you have to have the negative freedom to be able to do things, to be things, to have an access to various things. So, having said that, how do technologies act here? I would say that their role is quite positive. So they enhance our negative freedom, when we look at the internet as a phenomenon, not only at the recent happenings, invention of ChatGPT and so on, but its entirety. When we look at it, we see that it actually widened the scope of our freedom from government. It gives us a lot of space with no interference, with no compulsion, with no coercion. So I would say that up till now, the new technologies on the net, they're beneficial to our negative freedom. Choose enhancing our positive freedom. That's all I have to say about this question. Thank you.
You're really sure that the negative freedom can be enhanced by the... Oh, sorry. You're really sure that the negative freedom can be enhanced by the technology? What about surveillance? What about, you mentioned probably, or someone here, about the surveillance in China?
Mm-hmm. So yes, of course, there are dangers, but the dangers come from the interference from the governments. Nobody forced me to use Facebook, and actually I'm limiting my usage of this platform. But, well, I've heard that Mark Zuckerberg has some strange meetings with American Congress, also behind closed doors. So that's where the risk lies, when the suppliers of the new technologies are getting in touch with the power, with the politicians. So yes, you're right, and China is a perfect example of the total unity between the business and the government. That's a huge risk. That's what we should be very careful about, and what we should fight to keep the division of.
Bartosz, next philosopher in our team, what would you say?
Hello, everyone. I think it's customary to begin by thanking the organizers for the invitation, but I will not do that. And the reason I will not thank the organizers for inviting me is that you have put me in a really troublesome position, because the questions that we will be discussing, the issues that we will be discussing, can either be answered in a trivial way or are really unanswerable, because they pertain to very complex phenomena.
That's the typical answer for the philosopher.
That's only the beginning of the answer.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm in a really troublesome and difficult position. I have two choices. The first choice is maybe defined by what yesterday the famous British tennis player Emma Raducanu did. There was an interview. The journalist asked her 16 questions, I think, and she replied all the replies. When they counted the number of words, there were 58 words to answer 16 questions. So that's one of my options. But I wouldn't do that to my good friend Marcin Gorazda, so I only have the second choice, to try to be controversial. So I will try to be controversial, although I do reserve the right to plead the Raducanu if the circumstances arise. And the answer to this question is that there is no relationship whatsoever between our positive or negative freedom and the developments in artificial intelligence and new technologies, because the point is how we use them. We can use them in such a way that we enhance our freedom, positive or negative. So there is no causal relationship. In a way, still being controversial, I would say that the new technologies are like gravitation. Does gravitation enhance our positive or negative freedom or not? No, it really doesn't. It's just a fact out there in the environment. And the same holds for new technologies. They are just out there. They are part of our environment. This is the environment in which we need to interact with one another, make decisions, and so on and so on. And in this way, in some cases, we can, argue that this kind of using new technologies or some sophisticated algorithms is something which enhances our positive freedom or negative freedom. Under other circumstances, it inhibits them. But I don't see, there is no there is no easy, simple connection between the two, and therefore I'm tempted to say that there is no connection at all.
I noted it down. I will go back to that because I think it's very provocative. So, John, do you have any observation on that? I mean, you are the founder of the companies which were based on the modern technology. Do you see any impact of those companies or other companies when you're an investor on the improvement of the people's life? I mean, on the freedom, negative or positive freedom, or whatever, because we have just heard from Bartek that there is no relation, actually. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, oops. There we go. Modern technology has definitely improved our positive freedom. I started my first company in '92, my second company in '97, and my third company in 2013. Back in the early '90s, what required a development team, software development team of 12 people, only required a software development team of 6 people by 1997, and only required 1 or 2 people by 2013, because the software development platforms had become so much more powerful over there. I remember how challenging it was, for example, to accept a credit card over the internet way back in the mid-90s. That was high technology. Now that is trivial. So new technologies have made it easier to be innovative, to try new things, to innovate. And maybe innovation is just one aspect of positive freedom, but certainly it's an important aspect. Every time a new product or service comes to market, there are new opportunities. You can improve the product or service by making it faster, cleaner, smarter, whatever adjective is applicable. The companies that are providing the products and services have needs, marketing, sales, inventory control, you name it. And very often new products and services create needs around them. For example, electric vehicles create the need for charging stations. So there have never been as many products and services on the market as there are today, and so there have never been as many opportunities to satisfy new customer needs as there are today, because every time a new product or service comes to market, yes, needs are being satisfied, but also new needs are being created. I think of it as a very high-dimensional space. We can only think in terms of 3 dimensions, but imagine a much larger space with millions of dimensions, one for each customer need. Well, the more needs there are, the bigger the space, and the more people can innovate without bumping into each other and having to compete directly. That's a win-win. That increases positive freedom, it seems to me. What decrements that positive freedom is when a regulation comes along and slices that huge high-dimensional space so that anything on the other side of this plane is disallowed. Well, just imagine if you keep inserting planes of regulations on all different dimensions of that space, what had been an infinite space gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there are fewer and fewer opportunities. You have more and more entrepreneurs who are competing more and more directly with each other in a smaller and smaller space because there's no place else to go. That turns what should be a very positive sum situation into a negative or zero-sum situation. So yes, as Sebastian was saying, I see it as primarily restrictions imposed by governments that I cannot escape from that limit my positive freedom.
Right, so you don't see that the governmental regulation may actually contribute to our freedom if they restrict the power of the big corporations?
Generally, I see it as a continuous battle between a positive force that expands our freedoms and government encroaching on that positive freedom. And sometimes government gets ahead, sometimes technology enables new freedoms. Occasionally, government will enable new freedoms. If there's a Supreme Court decision that honors a personal freedom, But generally, it's an adversarial thing, it seems to me.
Right. So we got the following positions here. I mean, Sebastian sees the link between the technology and negative freedom and the positive link. You see the link between technology and positive freedom, and you think it's in generally quite an improvement. Bartek see no relevance as a philosopher. You're gonna be alone. So, and I think that this somehow support you. Martin, what's your opinion on that? I mean, is there any relevance or no relevance, or is it a threat, or merely something else?
Yeah, I would like to add something kind of like an historical perspective might be interesting there. So if you look back at what happened with the computers, we are doing things now that we would probably have never dreamt about just 50 years ago. But still, would you say that people, because of that, would say that they are freer today than they were 50 years ago? I'm actually not sure about that. Probably they won't. And the reason for that, I would say, is that probably the government interference that they experienced in that time was more than outweighing the benefits of computers. Yeah, so maybe what you said, that it really depends on how we use the tools. I think that was a very important point you made. It really depends when it comes to all tools on how you use them. A knife can be an incredible, useful tool. It can also be deadly. So it depends. So when it comes to negative freedom, I think there's also a great example we can use, especially here. You were living under communist rule, and probably people after the communist rule fell were feeling much more free. So I guess that these could be good examples for the difference between negative and positive freedom, it seems to me.
Actually, I got an impression that our communist regime were not very smart in handling the modern technology, so it has nothing in common with freedom. That's my opinion, of course, but we may differ on that. Okay, let me be more specific, because when I was introducing the concept of the positive freedom, so I got an impression that in principle, like Sebastian said, or John, that we, by the technology, we may improve people's life. If we are improving people's life, so then we make this life better, we are increasing the positive freedom. But on the other hand, we got another problem which is often posed as a threat. I mean, if there is a modern technology, so a lot of professions, a lot of jobs may become redundant. Yeah, so the people will be losing their job, maybe. I don't know, that's going to be the question for you. And if they'll be losing their job, so we are no longer talking about the improvement, we are talking about the decreasing of the quality of their life. Yeah, and I'm intentionally now introducing the concept of work, because what I'm thinking is not only earning money, because we may imagine the world when the people are no longer need to work, but they still have money, because the technology will replace us, the robots will be serving as our servants, whatever. Yeah, but the problem is that work constitutes the important part of our life balance. Yeah, so it's something like a self-realization. Yeah, so the question is, do you really think that we may find a lot of our jobs redundant, and we may find ourselves in a world when we have no purpose, when we are no longer needed by the society because we are replaced by the technology? Do you think it's a threat or not? How do you find it? Bartek, you see no connection still between the technology and the improvement of our life, positive freedom. So you need to comment on that.
You know, I already feel not needed in the society. So it's already happened for me. If I may comment...
I need you very much. I need you.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. I would like to come back to a related question of whether the development of technologies in any way extends this field of possibilities. I said there is no connection, and I would stick quite seriously to this claim. First of all, I'm not really sure how to measure the size of the field of possibilities. Yes, it is a fact that once we have computers, we can do much more things that was possible before the invention of a computer. But the invention of a computer also caused some of the possibilities to disappear. Like, the fact that we have all those new technologies, all this civilizational progress, resulted, for instance, in the fact that there is 7 or maybe even 8 billion people in the world. So there is no the option, the possibility anymore to go from Warsaw to Krakow and see no, buildings, technologies, and such things. This is an infringement on a positive freedom in a way. So the fact that we introduce something, we develop something new, also means that we lose something else. So this is one thing. The other related to that, Marcin, you said that the technological progress made people's lives better. This is, again, evaluation. It's a valuation, and the question is, we can also say something different. When we look at things from the point of view of evolutionary theory, cognitive science, we may see that the human mind, as shaped by the evolutionary forces, is not capable of handling the rapid speed of everyday life right now. It's not shaped so that we can easily use new technologies. This is probably the reason that we have more and more problems with mental health and such things. So what I'm trying to do here is to analyze. I'm not expressing my individual convictions, let's say, but I wouldn't so easily and quickly say, technological progress means better life, or technological problems means extending the field of possibility. I don't even know how to measure it. I have no idea how to measure those possibilities. I'm hesitant to agree with this claim.
Right. When I was talking about the betterment because of the technology, so I got in mind a very basic concept of the betterment. I mean, I'm not talking about our internal soul and our, cognitive abilities and things like that. What I'm thinking is that we are, for instance, we get rid of poverty in Europe or in the developed world. And one of the contributors to the fact that we are living in a wealthier society is probably technology. We may dispute about that, but economists generally agree that we are living in a better environment in this term, that we no longer strive for food, for shelter. Yeah, so it's a better word in these terms. If it's a better word for our psychological abilities, I don't know. I have no idea about that. But it's simple measure. I mean, just the betterment in terms of whether we are wealthier or not. So I know that it's evaluation, but
yeah, but this is the key. This is not a statement of fact. This is an evaluation, really. And if we are clear with that, and we've agreed that it is really the case, we can go on. But one can adduce arguments that it may not necessarily be a fact.
Right. Yeah. John, you are making a notes. So I believe that the notes refer somehow to our discussion. So do you think that we'll be without work within a couple of decades due to the modern technology? Is it something good or not?
Well, to answer that question, I'd ask who here would like to live 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago? If you lived in 10, 50, 100 years ago, you'd be giving up all the technologies and conveniences that we enjoy today. My guess is that relatively few people in this room could even survive 500 years ago, because none of the modern pharmaceuticals and other devices that we take for granted today would be available. Availability of food and so forth. Few people today choose to live like the Amish, who reject modern technology, but even the Amish people who have wagons instead of automobiles use some modern conveniences like iPhones. With every new technology, there are winners and losers. The manufacturers of fax machines and VCR machines were losers. Their assets and capital have been reapplied to some other application today that is more productive than making those obsolete products. So I don't believe we're going to be out of work 50 years from now. I do believe work will be very different. It'll be more meaningful and more independent, I suspect. They say that during COVID, 40% of the U.S. workforce, representing 6% of the U.S. economy, was able to work from home remotely. Consider what those percentages would have been back for the Spanish flu of 1918. Maybe 2 or 3% of people. There would have been much less flexibility back then. My guess is that even 20 years from now, those percentages will be 60 or 80%. Even people who are doing manual labor today will be able somehow to do that remotely through robotic devices that they control from their keyboards and screens or whatever the 20-year from now equivalent of those is. So what this says is that we need to be flexible and always learning new skills, always attentive to new technologies and trying to think about how new technologies could possibly influence our lives and jobs and be ready for the possibility that what we're currently doing won't be needed anymore.
I think that I need to be a little bit provocative to your thoughts.
Okay.
Well, you're reminding me the case of COVID and the people who are working during the case of COVID. And I got an impression that maybe we are under the threat, which was once posed by our famous writer, Stanisław Lem. So he was a scientific, popular scientific writer. And he once mentioned that maybe because of the modern technology, we are facing the new division in the modern society. I mean, the division is against the very peculiar border. I mean, on the one side, you got the people who can fluently speak English and know the modern technology. And on the other side, you got the people who are mainly manual workers. They cannot communicate in English and they don't know the modern technology. And that was exactly the case I remember, which was described in reference to Sweden, who was very lenient towards those COVID restrictions. Yeah? And there's a strong difference between the people who are working from home, because they were usually white-collar workers, and between the people who are working as manual workers, who are exposed for this disease. And that's the question. It's not exactly the question to you, but you may comment on that. That maybe that's the threat. I mean, that we are facing the new division in our societies. Yeah, there are people who are going to be the privileged, like we here in this room. Yeah, because we know how to handle this technology, and those who are deprived of these abilities and their life may be even worse because of that. It reminds me the very famous Maschinen fragment, so the fragment on machines written by Karl Marx. And this threat was then posed. He has no idea about the modern technology. He was just talking about the automatization of work according to the conditions which were possible in the 19th century. So what do you think about that? I mean, John, you may comment on that, then Sebastian maybe.
As I said, there are going to be winners and losers, but overall people benefit if they have these if technology advances, as evidenced by the fact that very few people would prefer to live 10, 50, 100 years ago.
I mean, we may make a poll. Today. Is there anybody who would like to live 10 years ago, would like to go back? Yeah, because you're going to be younger, I know you.
No,
but there are some. You would buy a Bitcoin. Yeah. So, the very mercantile purpose. Sorry? I would make better choices. Right? Oh, so, okay, so we got 3 votes. Who want to leave 10 years? Oh, okay. So there are some.
I wasn't very specific about what the rules were. I'm not sure you get younger. It's just living as we are today, only with whatever technology you had 10, 15
Thomas
years ago.
under this condition? Not really. Okay, so you changed your mind. Okay, the Bitcoin is still valid.
An interesting question is who would be the winners and losers, and I have a thought on that. To my way of thinking, the winners are likely to be the people with the greatest passion and perseverance, and I think that is the most important factor for being successful in the future, more so than education, more so than whatever assets you happen to be born into. That trumps everything in the long term. So there could well be a lot of mixing of who's successful in the future as compared to today.
Right. I would like to. Okay. Right. Go ahead.
Well, I would make or I would take a different example here that maybe makes things easier. If you are confronted with the task of preparing a dish, would you prefer an empty kitchen or would you prefer a fully equipped kitchen? I guess everybody would prefer a fully equipped kitchen, and that is how I would think about technological progress. You're getting more tools, whether you use them or not, but you're getting more tools. Of course, there are dangers, and it also has a connection, in my opinion, to learning, to lifelong learning. And that is why in the previous question I emphasized the responsibility, that being responsible is very important. You are responsible yourself for making sure that you can use the tools. Nobody can take that away from you. So, yeah, I think we are in a difficult situation simply because of the fact that many people now are acting very irresponsibly in their lives.
Right.
If I may add something
sure.
to these reflections, well, I think that it's very hard. It would be very hard to argue that overall technologies are a loss on the net rather than a gain for the humanity. And there is a very simple, it's not even a thought experiment. So we have a good science about what happened before we became agrarian farmers. So we have this hunter-gatherer societies, right? So there are estimations that those people worked 4 or 5 hours a day by picking fruits from the trees or by hunting for, of course, some animals. And then what happened after they worked? What happened after they ate? So there's this romantic picture, probably taken from Rousseau, of a happy savage who's, I don't know, who's very happy looking at the sun. No, they were just idle. They were doing completely nothing. They were walking around. This is the current scientific knowledge, at least, about this period of time. There were no technologies whatsoever. Up to 10,000 years before, there was no advancement in technologies whatsoever. So, yeah, think of it. Now the situation is totally different. We have become farmers, then we invented, in a way, we invented free markets or markets. We let them, actually we didn't invent them, we let them function by what Dieter McCloskey has written about, by allowing the virtue of entrepreneurship and innovation. And we earned not only all the time that the hunter-gatherers have, but also the tools to make this time fulfilling. Hunter-gatherers didn't write a lot of poetry. They didn't watch a lot of Netflix. They didn't. They weren't able to visit places around the world. To go to Paris, of course, right, or to Rome, whatever the weekend you choose, you go there. We do have this chance. So, and answering your original question, well, the technology makes us somehow lost in this too much free time, leisure. Well, I don't think so. I very rarely quote John Maynard Keynes, but he wrote a great essay on the virtue of idleness, praise. The title was a price of idleness. And I totally agree. We as a humanity evolved to be lazy, to not to do anything, but thanks to what? To technologies, because they make it interesting.
I get an impression that Bartek would like to comment on the happy savage. Am I right?
Why not? I think that currently this picture of the hunter-gatherers, then agriculture and so on, is being redrawn quite seriously by archaeologists, evolutionary scientists. The picture is slightly different. It's just emerging from the new data. But probably it wasn't so Rousseauian as we.
Yes.
And the groups of hunter-gatherers probably were able to build quite complex buildings. They had some kind of technology and so on and so on. But I believe that we would need at least another 3 hours to talk about this. In a way, they had if really they had only 5 days of work and then they could do anything. They had no Netflix, of course, but there are other good things to do. So they were doing what Keynes suggested, that is quite pricey. They had a lot of time for that, apparently. Now, I think that because it is quite, for instance, if I were asked the question whether I would like to live 10 years ago, it all depends on so many variables. So my first reaction was where, how much money would I have? You know, a lot of, because in some instances I would say never, in some instances I would say yes, please. I don't need this thing. It helps me sometimes. Sometimes it's just a thing that disturbs my peace and quiet. But one thing that John said, I think is important. No matter what kind of technology you have, it's perseverance. So who gets on top? Not the people who have the best education. I fully agree with that. And there is a nice thing in the cognitive. You probably remember the marshmallow test. So this is this experiment that young children were put into a room with a marshmallow, and they were asked not to eat it. And you know, they were observed. The time before they really ate it was measured, and the correlation was found between the ability to not to eat it and the success in later life. So the longer a kid could not eat the thing, the better chances for a success in life. And as you can see from my posture, I ate my immediately. And I have the feeling that both Marcin and John still have their marshmallows somewhere hidden in their cupboards.
I noticed Sebastian passed the marshmallow test because he has not eaten a single cookie directly in front of him, while I've eaten all of the sandwich cookies on this plate here. So I'm going to give them away.
I've just eaten one, so I'm sorry.
So I don't see them anymore, and I won't be tempted to eat more marshmallows.
Right. Let me a little bit switch the topic. I mean, I would like to go ahead with that, and I would like to discuss a little bit about the collecting our personal data, proceeding our personal data, and using our personal data maybe for better recognition of our preferences. I mean, it's also about the modern technology. It's also about the computer science, computer learning, or whatever we call it. I'm not a specialist. And I would like to start with John, because John, you once founded a company. I must admit, I don't know exactly what the company was doing, but that was, I mean, customer sat. Yeah, so I believe that the company was involved in measuring the satisfaction of the customer somehow. Yeah. So the question for you is, what were you measuring? What do you think is customer satisfaction? And the next question is, of course, what we can do with the modern technology? Because we got more and more information about our customers, if you are the company founder, but we got more and more information about our citizens, if you are the member of the government. Yeah. So both things seems to be good and bad at the same time. I mean, good because we can recognize the preferences of our customers and fulfill them better, simply satisfy them better with our products, right? But on the other hand, we got the government who knows more and more about us and can use this knowledge for various purposes, right? So, as a founder of the company like that, what do you think? What are our preferences? Do you think companies are allowed to gather those information, collect them, and use it for the good or for not for good, whatever?
So satisfaction is an attitude. Purchases are a behavior. Surveys capture the attitudes. Purchase data captures the behavior, and together they're actually the best predictor of what a customer is likely to do, continuing to buy your product or discontinuing it. And that's what our clients are usually trying to determine, which of their customers are at risk, but a bunch of other things like what are they doing well, where are we doing well, and where do we need to improve on different performance metrics. But the thrust of your question, the real meat of your question is government, though, and their collection of data. And the primary question, it seems to me, that should be asked is who can best deliver the services for which the data is being collected to do a better job of providing? Is it the government, or is it, as Martin asked earlier in the question in the previous panel, a marketplace of competing private companies? The competing private companies are incentivized to be innovative, efficient, customer service oriented, and to compensate people, if necessary, for providing the data for them. The government, being a monopoly and one who may well be able to impose on you to provide data or take action or whatever, is none of those. So there are really two issues here. One is who should provide whatever service it is that the government is presuming to collect data to do a better job of providing. Should it even be the government in the first place, or should it be private players? And then two, even if it is the government, who does the best job of gathering the data and making it available? There's a book, I can't I'll think of the name. It's the Open Society or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank, but the thesis of the book is the only way that we can combat the government collecting more and more data about us is to make the data public so that we have access to the same data the government does. And and that way we can use it as effectively as they can. At the same time, there is a trend going on where more and more of what we consider to be private these days is becoming public information. In some sense, we're returning to the little village of 200 years ago where Mrs. Grundy, looking out of her window, knew everything that was going on in the neighborhood because she could see who was coming and going into each other's houses and so forth. That kind of data collection is becoming ubiquitous because video cameras are becoming so cheap and commonplace, even in private hands. And some philosophers view that a period of relative privacy in our lives has been a relatively short period of maybe 2 centuries in man's history, from 1800 to 2000. Anyway, those are, I'm not sure I've answered your question, but those are some thoughts.
Right. Let me go a little bit farther with these questions, because that's an interesting topic. I mean, if we say that a company are allowed to collect data to provide better products, and that's, I believe, you and me believe that it's acceptable. So the next question should be, okay, is government allowed to collect the data to provide better services?
You first tell me the service. Which service do you have in mind?
I'm in the public service. There's a lot of public service.
Go ahead.
And I'm in Europe, maybe not in the United States, but in Europe, one of the public service which is often provided by the government are the health care. Yeah, this is the public service which is provided. So the question is, are they allowed to collect those data to provide better services, or you think it's not possible because it's something like a limitation of our rights?
Well, the fact is, long term, we will have better health care. We will enjoy, all of us, better health care at lower cost if there's a competitive marketplace of healthcare providers. Why isn't there a healthcare provider on every street corner like there is a McDonald's or a Wendy's or a Burger King? Well, it's because it's a government monopoly, and it's a lot more expensive. Wouldn't it be more cost effective? So I know I don't mean to avoid your question, but it seems to me we should not forget that fundamental question first, which is who can best provide the service.
Okay, Martin, I will go to you. You are the tax expert, right? I read only yesterday that in Poland, about 95% of tax audits conducted by the tax inspectors are effective. I mean, they are revealing some tax evasion practices. 95% is a indicator which gives us information about the effectiveness, and it's really an awesome result, right? But it's possible because they are collecting a massive amount of data regarding the taxpayers, and they are focusing and targeting the particular taxpayers to reveal these practices of tax evasion. What would you say about that? I mean, some of those information are publicly available and some are not. And they are collecting those data, I don't want to say in an illegal way, but in a way which is not publicly available, as you postulated, John. So, Martin, would you say it's okay?
Well, I want to introduce by saying that the tax topic depresses me. That's why I don't want to speak too much.
You can share your depression with us too. There's no problem, you know. But
well,
at the end, I would like to answer the questions regarding the data collection.
Well, I think it is an issue because this goes into government control. You know, having every aspect of your life controlled. And that also goes into the financial aspects. I'm not a fan of that at all. So I see a risk with data collection. But at the same time, I also want to warn people who are saying that we only have to collect data and then feed the data into models, and we will have perfect information on what the government ought to do. I don't think that's the case. There are knowledge limits which are often overseen. There's, for example, what Hayek termed tacit knowledge. Let me give an example here. Do you think that if you would be locked in a room for 4 weeks with a billiard pro player, and he tells you everything he knows about billiards, would you then be able to play billiard as good as that player would play? I guess you wouldn't claim that. So this goes into there is knowledge that can be communicated, and there is knowledge that is just inner knowledge, and it's incredibly hard, maybe even impossible for some kinds of knowledge, to feed this knowledge into models. So you probably can't do that. And at the same time, there's also the issue that you have to have quantifiable data, at least to a degree quantifiable, that you can then feed into the models. You can't do that with every kind of data. So we have to be careful there. There are limits. And when it goes to the government providing better services, well, John said already something on that, but for me it also goes back to democracy. So if democracy could be seen as two wolves and one sheep voting on what's to dinner. And if this is our concept of democracy, then I would argue it's very, very dangerous to allow the government to provide services. Why? Well, simple. We should allow every single individual to either create or consume the products that he or she prefers. If the government does it, there's mostly one or maybe two products, but these are all based on some kind of democratic consensus. And the democratic consensus is often very, very imperfect. So keep that in mind when talking about...
I get an impression that you are a little bit escaping the question, because we may discuss which services should or should not be provided by the government, but even the libertarian, they agree that there is a narrow scope of services which are provided by the government, like security or like tax collection. So if we are here not an anarchist, and we do not deny that for the certain purposes taxes are necessary. So that was one of the examples. Yeah? The government is using the data, which are collected in a various way, in order to target the taxpayers who are probably tax evaders. And there is a basic question. Do you think that it's morally acceptable? I mean, are they allowed to do that or not? Because it's not the problem about models. Models may have some failures, yeah? But this is not about the objective truths which are coming out of these models. We are just targeting the people or companies who are probably tax evaders to collect taxes, you know? And if we agree that taxes are necessary in the government, so automatically we may say, okay, that's great, that's fine. We don't like tax evaders if you are the honest taxpayers, right?
Can I instead, or maybe additionally to Martin, answer your question? I mean, what's the reason of the very fact that tax evasion exists? Of course, in every circumstance, when you collect taxes, tax evasion would exist, but it's a matter of the scale. Which country of the scale? Which country has a simple, clear tax code in Europe, in the world? Well, outside, beside some tax havens, none. Well, if you create, as a state, as a government, a very complicated tax code with a lot of loopholes, with a lot of articles that could be somehow avoided if you are knowledgeable enough, as for example tax advisors are, then you can avoid paying taxes. If you create a simple tax code with predictable and easy to understand articles, then the scale of tax evasion becomes so small, so unnoticeable, that it is no longer a problem whether we should collect some additional information of taxpayers or not, because the answer is a clear answer, and it's just simple no.
I also want to step in there. Well, there is a simple reason that I sidestepped your question, and that is there is no simple answer. The issue is that if government uses data to see whether you are tax evading or not, who tells you they are not using the data for much more problematic areas? And that's why I prefer to keep government collection of data very, very limited, even if it means that we are not, that the government isn't aware of some cases of tax evasion. It's a simple trade-off, and I think it's a trade-off that we should be accepting for the simple reason that there are immense dangers for providing the wealth of data that needs to government.
Martin, the same logic is, I got an impression, the same logic works for the collection of data for the private companies. I mean, in principle, they are collecting data to provide us with the better products. But who gives me the warranty that they will not be using this data for any other purposes? I mean, we were talking about the businessman, you know, and we know that the main principle of the business, or not for everybody maybe, is maximization profits. But I would not exclude that there are some businessmen who have some particular values in the background. Yeah, so they may use those data for any other purposes. I mean, the threat is both on the side of the government collecting the data and on the side of the companies collecting the data.
I fully agree. And that is why first competition is necessary. And keep in mind that the government is the only monopoly that can use force. And that's why it's even more dangerous in the public area. It is dangerous in the private sector as well. I'm not saying it isn't, but there are more risks on the government side.
Right. Bartosz, what would you say about that? I mean, I got in mind the very recent affair regarding the Pegasus and collecting the information from the political opposition in Poland and the Citizen Lab in Canada, who is trying to give us some more information about who exactly was investigated and for what reasons. I mean, it looks like a threat. The government were using the software which gave them the incredible power, yeah, to investigate the political opposition. So does it constitute the threats to the democracy, and what could be the barriers or limits, restrictions to defend against such an abuse of those software?
Yeah, I'm tempted to plead the Raducanu, but, and answer, I don't know, but there are three things. Maybe this won't be a direct reply to your question, but three observations. The first is that not only the gathering of data, but the way it is done is problematic in a way in the public perception. So in this land, in Poland, before the arrival of the internet, I think that the institution which gathered huge data sets, and probably they still have, is the Catholic Church, of course, not the state. And you know, no one, it wasn't a problem in a way. Sometimes some people claimed that, but it wasn't a problem. It becomes a problem when this happens completely. Okay, the human mind has, if there's another person doing something, and we can connect, that we may say, okay, it's wrong, they should not do it, but there is no emergence of this fear that something completely unpredictable or horrible will happen. Once we hear about Cambridge Analytica and, you know, all these things that the algorithm can do, what are those algorithms? No, this is this great mystery, and people don't understand what the algorithms do, in fact. And therefore, I think this exponentially increases the fear of data collection. That's one observation. I don't know whether it leads somewhere or not, but I think that this is an important thing, that currently this is a hot issue and equipped or leading to fearsome perspectives because of the way the data is collected. The second observation is that we cannot stop it. That to say that the law is always a few steps behind the technological progress, and it will always be. So if there is someone with financial means, creativity, who will need the data, they will collect them somehow. If this way of getting the information about our preferences, for instance, is banned by the law, they will find another one, because you know, our behavior can be measured probably in so many ways that if something becomes illegal, then there are other ways to gather the same kind of data. So I think it cannot be stopped. Although I'm quite sympathetic when it comes to the level of the integration of the government, of course. The third and final observation is that, again, and I think that this claim has been made here, and I fully agree with it, the important thing is not whether the data is gathered or not, but how it translates into political decisions, for instance. This is the problematic place, not the fact that we have the data. Again, it's like a tool. We can have huge data sets and we can do data mining and find patterns which sometimes are quite surprising. We can uncover some truth, an interesting truth about our society. The problem is how this is used when you witnessed for any really governmental actions in any time in history. But for instance, recently in Poland, would it matter that the government knew exactly the preferences of the entire? No, it wouldn't. They would just do what they believe is good for winning the election, and the same holds for any government anywhere. And probably a similar story may be told with some modifications with regard to...
But if they know the preferences, so that it's easier for them to win the election, maybe tricking people. Right, John, you would like to add something?
We all know how complex the U.S. Census and decennial census has become, pages and pages that we have to fill out. It's interesting to compare that to the U.S. Constitution provides for the census. You know how much data it required that it collect? 1 binary digit per person. 1 bit. 1 if you're alive, 0 if you are dead or haven't been born yet. And of course that was used and is used to determine allocations in Congress. It's interesting to compare how far we've come.
Right, I got an impression that we got half an hour, so maybe some questions from the audience if you have. Okay, oh, so many. Right, so the lady in the middle was the first, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the interesting panel. I have a question/comment to the first part. Also, when you said we are more free thanks to technology, that does sound kind of like Marxist literature for a bit, because first comes mindset and then comes technology. And I think like the discussion about technology and freedom, of course, it was very future-oriented. It was looking at the tool and how we choose to use the tool. But I think that we should also look a little bit backwards and look a little bit inwards. So there is a study on the innovation and entrepreneurial mindset in Germany. And Germany is a great place to study because we have West Germany and East Germany, the same country, different systems. So now, even today, in 2020s, this map really looks patchworky in terms of, again, it's hard to measure. I have that study somewhere in terms of innovation and new companies, being set. So it seems that people who have been systemically, emotionally abused by a socialist regime will not be flexible, will not be entrepreneurial, will not be future-oriented, and it will be harder for them to thrive in changing and innovating world. So it seems that mental health is actually kind of more important than technology in here, because that's where it starts. Like, freedom starts between your ears. So I know it's hard to discuss and it's hard to measure, but it seems that the mindset is what comes first. So that's like a general comment/question, and I know you touched a little bit on this, and I think we can also have more inward-leaning discussions on this, because it seems that freedom is more linked with our brains than with technology, because technology is really a tool.
I wouldn't like to say that the system in which we were Rosen, I mean, whether it was a communist system or a capitalist system doesn't matter. But I just one remark came to my mind when you were talking about this natural experiment between the West and East Germany, is that maybe the people who are more free market oriented, more innovative, they simply emigrated to the West Germany. So it's not only about the fact in which environment we were growing, but also what division happened after the reunification of the Germany. Yeah, which could also contribute somehow to this patchy map of the Germany. So,
yeah, that's true. But also, it's not that the communist regime, like in this particular example, didn't have any effect on human minds, because there is always an effect on human mind. And I'm just using it as an example. You know, even if it's an individual example and you live in some kind of corporation where your boss is being abusive towards you, you leave that corporation, you need time to readjust to the changing world because of the changes that had been done to your head. So it's not like it didn't have any effect on the people, because you go out of the Eastern Bloc, like still, I'm still using it as an example, but this phenomenon still exists, and people are feeling a little bit less respected than others, and people are feeling a little bit more like tools. So it still needs more time to adjust, like still needs time to, we still need some time to level up, because economically it's easier, but psychologically it may be more difficult.
Is anyone who would like to comment on that? No? Okay.
Raducanu.
What?
I said Raducanu, it's too difficult.
It's too difficult. So you raised a difficult question.
I agree with your thesis. The more guardrails and constraints there are around us, the more risk averse we tend to become. And East Germany versus West Germany, I'm sure that sounds like a credible example to me. I see it happening in the U.S. You know, in my lifetime, more seatbelts in cars. When I was a kid, they weren't required. I'm old enough to remember that. Now, for anyone who has been raised in an environment where you have to wear seatbelts, to ride in a high-speed moving vehicle without wearing a seatbelt seems like a risky endeavor. Is that keeping people from branching out on their own, starting businesses, taking risks? Certainly the rate of entrepreneurship has been steadily declining in the U.S. over the last several decades, from about 27 per 10,000 to the high teens per 10,000. So I do think there's a correlation there, and if anyone has any data on it that makes that relationship more tangible, I'd be very interested in. If you have more data about East and West Germany, I'd be interested in that too. Thank you.
I have that paper somewhere, yeah.
Thanks.
Right. Who's next? Gentlemen.
Thank you so much. My name is Sebastian Wenglerz. I represent Freedom and Entrepreneurship Foundation and Liberty National. Thank you so much, guys, for the interesting panel. I would like to ask you a small question. Just let me give you a brief comment and then rather a small pleasant question. So what's the best type of business to run in Belarus? It's IT business, IT sector. Why? Because the government has no clue how to regulate it, right? Let's keep it that way. Let's keep it decentralized. The market is always ahead of the regulation. So that's what Professor Brożek just said a moment ago, and usually that's not the case for the Western governments, right? That can afford higher quality experts. But let me just add a small comment as a libertarian positivist, voluntarist / anarchist. For those of us who think we are doomed as humanity because we are approaching this social credit score systems, right? Big tech in bed with the government. I would like to say if even if there are 100 million people right now working on how to make our life worse, the rest of the humanity is working on how to make our life better. So let's believe in the market, let's believe in the humanity. And just a small pleasant question to our honorable panelists and the moderator as well. Do you guys personally use any, that's an exaggeration a little bit, but those AI models, language pre-trained models that are available on the market? And if you use them, roughly how much time does it save you? How more productive you are? Thank you so much.
May I start? The very short answer. I asked 3 tax questions to ChatGPT. I got 3 wrong answers. And that was the end of the story of my adventure with the ChatGPT. Right, go ahead. About technology, John.
Well,
AI.
Yes. ChatGPT is still getting better. How many people here have played with ChatGPT? Okay, most of us, great. Well, the fact is, it is a huge productivity gain for lots of people and is creating lots of entrepreneurial opportunities for thousands of entrepreneurs. Just do a search online of ChatGPT and entrepreneurship and see all the articles that you get. I understand that Italy has just disallowed ChatGPT in Italy for privacy concerns, and further, it's been reported that France, Germany, and Ireland could follow suit. How sad. Because that means that people in those countries will not get to enjoy the productivity benefits of these new tools. And they will just fall further and further behind from the other countries that are allowing them. So let's push back if for the benefit of our country long term, if the suggestion is made to disallow these new technologies in our countries. I could say much more about this. There are risks. There are right ways to deal with the risks. It's not to disallow them. It's to use tort law. If someone, wait until somebody is injured or damaged by an AI. That may well happen, just as someone can be injured by a car or by a drone. What's the right thing to do? Have a court of law and have the matter adjudicated by a judge or jury, and let the appropriate resolution of the conflict be determined in terms of compensation for the person who was damaged or injured if it's warranted. And that approach will allow society to enjoy the benefits of these productivity tools, but also incentivize the developers of them to keep them in check so that they don't do damage or harm.
Sebastian, do you use AI technology for your private purposes?
Well, I do. I mean, ChatGPT maybe is not so useful for me, but some other AI solutions are. For example, interview transcription tools getting better and better every month. So I remember 2-3 years ago, it was possible, of course, to transcribe an interview from the voice recording to the text, but it was full of mistakes, and you cannot really recognize who is the speaker. You didn't have like okay, so it was not edited. But now, when you put this audio recording from an interview into these various programs, apps, you get like a clear-cut interview with almost all things edited. You just do short editing. It saves you like 2-3 hours per an interview. It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. Hopefully, my editor-in-chief does not know that yet. So this is the first thing. And the second remark or impression I have is that the people who are against or who are afraid of ChatGPT, sorry to say, but in their traits, they are those who we would say mediocre people. They're not the best in their traits. So I have friends among like the best musicians in the world, and one of the most innovative keyboard player from the US, by the way. Every time I meet him, he's showing me a new app, and he showing me how he is using this new app to enhance his music, to compose things, to search for new sounds, and so on and so on. So people who complain, they are just overwhelmed with the simple feeling that we all get when we are asked for some additional amount of job. We just don't want to do it.
Don't you think, Sebastian, that we have something like a moral obligation also to face the fears of those people who are mediocre? I mean, maybe we should also look after them and not leave them alone.
Yes,
leave them behind.
Yes, of course, we should be very empathetic towards them, but this not excludes the simple fact that I just stated. I mean, let's help people. Let's try to get them familiar with those tools. Let's show them how to use them to save time, to become more creative. To teach them, yes. But you know, for example, yesterday I read a petition by Polish associations of scriptwriters. That, well, maybe we should stop using this ChatGPT for a while because it's such a huge risks for our jobs. And, you know, Polish TV series are one of the worst you can imagine. And most of those scriptwriters were the TV scriptwriters, Barwy Szczęścia, and so on and so on and so on. So do you really think that those kind of people should decide on the future of technologies? I don't think so.
Okay. John, before I give you advice, I would like to know, guys, if you are using the AI technology and if you can save your time with that. So just to answer the question of one of our guests. Okay? and then you, right? Bartek.
Thank you. As one of the mediocre people, I want to say
You're the most humble, so
that I use only Google search engine. It's a very good tool. It helps to reduce the time needed to write a book from 1 year to 3 months. It's good, I think. I don't want anything better.
Great achievement.
Yeah.
The one of those books which we are waiting in our book company. Yeah, that's
Yes.
yeah.
So it should be ready by the end of August, so I need to start in a month or two. But really, I have two observations. There is this fear, again, that there's a technology which can do what more than mediocre people can do, and somehow. But this is not true. Already at the beginning of the 14th century in what is today Spain, there was an interesting person called Raymond Lull. Raymond Lull is sometimes called the forerunner of the modern computers. He wanted to unify different religions together. There were Jewish religion present there, Islam, and the Catholicism, or Christian faith. And he believed that in order to do it, he needs to design a perfect language. So he designed an alphabet. He also designed special figures, even moving figures, that were to produce combinations of basic concepts. The problem is that the system itself did not decide what is true and what is not. It was just a help to show different configurations, and then it was the job of the philosopher, of a human being, to decide what is true and what is not. And I think the same, the famous chart may produce whatever I ask it to do, but then I need to assess it and say, okay, it's good, it's not good. And this finally reminds me of a very deep remark by Douglas Hofstadter, the author of the famous book Gödel, Escher, Bach. When Garry Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, the famous game of chess, Hofstadter said, this tells much more about the game of chess than about the human mind. And I think it still holds in relation to whatever sophisticated AI tools we have.
Yeah, I'll try to be short. I use all kinds of AI tools quite excessively. I think they are not perfect, but they are great tools to have. Two remarks. We have the Diversity Center next door. I think one issue of the large language models that are underlying these tools are sometimes lacking diversity of ideas, which I think could be a very relevant issue in the future. And also I think the policies that many of the makers of these tools are implementing to, be ethical, stuff like that. So these can also be problematic. I entered the question, give me reasons why environmentalist policies are good. And ChatGPT gave me many reasons why they are good. Then I entered the question, give me reasons why environmentalist policies are bad. He didn't give me any reasons. ChatGPT just told me environmentalism is just amazing and is great and should be pursued. That's it. Well, could be an issue.
Right. We got time for one more question, and John, you would like to add something, I guess, yes?
So, far from putting a mediocre programmer out of business or out of work, ChatGPT can turn the entry-level or mediocre programmer into an excellent programmer, working together. So it's an opportunity, especially for somebody who has limited skills or is a novice at the field. There's a lot to be said about, how many people have heard about the pause ChatGPT letter that's now been signed by 26,000 people, including such luminaries as Max Tegmark at MIT and Daron Acemoglu at MIT, the economist, and Elon Musk and others. They're suggesting that this technology has so many potentially risks that we should pause development of it for 6 months to figure out how we're going to manage those risks and better align the technology with our goals and aspirations. Well, I just have two things to say about this. Number one is the entire letter talks about the risks, but not one single word about the benefits. And the benefits are much harder to see of a new novel technology, which, like in your experience, got your taxes wrong 3 times. So the risks are very obvious, especially for a new technology. The benefits and potential are not nearly as obvious. If they were, entrepreneurs would already have reduced them to practice, and that takes time and thought and work. And so we need to balance the risk assesses or replace it with cost-benefit analysis and work extra hard to try to articulate the benefits of these technologies for people who can't think of them and to think of them ourselves to get a more balanced thing. And incidentally, rogue states are not going to pause their development of AIs, even if the cooperating states do. China is not going to stop development of their AI technology, even if the Western liberal democracies do. And then the final thing I'd say about this is also use the approach of having a court of law, a jury, or a judge adjudicate what's the appropriate resolution if someone is harmed or injured, and then let that process be used to inform a regulation, if appropriate, and also incentivize the developers of these AIs to make them do good.
Thank you. I saw some hands. Yeah, please, gentlemen.
So the question to Sebastian and Bartosz about the please. Is it better now? About the ownership of the data. There is this strong held conviction, especially in the EU, that I should be the owner of data that relates to myself and my actions. But shouldn't we challenge this conviction? Because although it is clear that the data is the results of my actions, the collection process and what happens with the data afterwards is the result of the entrepreneurial action and the employment of scarce resources that someone other owns. So would you care to comment on this?
But your name was first mentioned.
Well, so I get your point that some of the data that are collected are actually created in the market. That's what you're saying, from the scratch. So that they were not existent before they were collected. Like
I say that the justification seems rather weak for the individual to actually be the owner of the data that relates to himself, because the whole process is the result of the action and the employment of resources that someone else, the one who is gathering and employing the data, owns.
Yeah, I would say that this is just a legitimate concern. And probably logically you can defend this position very well, but then some practical matters come into play, and well, let's say if you have some privacy issues, well, in your say private life, and you have some troubles, you create this data, and some people can observe those data, but you would like to keep control over it. Not everybody around should know about your private life troubles, right? So logically, philosophically, as you can defend your position, but practically, you as a person, I believe you would like to have a control over a bunch of data about yourself.
Mrs. Grundy, the nosy neighbor, has a long history of looking out her window and seeing what you're doing. I can't imagine the lawmaking her activity and behavior illegal historically. Now let's say we put a camera, a video camera that continuously monitors your front door so I can see what time you leave and so forth, continuously for all time. What if I am close to a freeway or a road and I have a camera which can track the cars and the license plates even of the cars that go by and reduce them so that I'm building up a database of everybody who drives on that car. Maybe I have a network of friends in buildings throughout the city, and using the data collected from every window in all of those buildings throughout the city, I can compose the exact data set of cars that were traveling in the paths they followed. Should any of or all of that be illegal? I don't think so. It's just a modern day equivalent of what Mrs. Grundy was doing and all of her lady neighbor friends, 100 years ago. And if we do disallow it, it's purely arbitrary. So who owns that data? It's all of the people who collected it, I would think. They're the ones who invested and so forth and innovated and aggregated the data. So I challenge this notion that you own your own data, or at least if you do, it should be a very limited notion, because nowadays anyone can very readily, increasingly easily, gather a lot of data about everyone.
If I might cut in, and maybe Bartosz, you could follow up on this. Is even saying that there is such thing as my data in terms of, in a meaning of that I own my data about me, would that be correct in a meaningful sense? Not in our present legal context, of course.
Guys, I would like to interrupt you because we are running out of time, and I would like to finish this meeting on time. If you don't mind, I would like Bartek to, could you please make some final remarks on that? We started from the philosophical question and philosophical introduction, so just please be short so that the people can discuss something during the break.
Okay, these, I will try. These are very complex matters, but also new in a way that the conceptual schemes that we have may not be prepared to capture the interesting conceptual differences, for instance, like in the case that we've been discussing a moment ago. I don't know what it means that data relates to me. What is data? What does it mean to own data? Maybe the concept of ownership should be changed. So this is the first observation. The second is that in order to change a paradigm, or at least consider or entertain a paradigm change, you need to be controversial, you need to be able to look at the problems from a completely different perspective. Only in this way we can try to detach ourselves from the thinking habits that we have. And please remember, the inertial forces in our minds are enormous, and it is very difficult to not to come back to what we usually think.
I have just a very quick statement on that. I would say that you own your data as long as you don't publish it in any way. That's the default. If you publish the data in any way, well, that's on you. This is only an issue if the government interferes with you keeping the data in any way. Then it's an issue. But in essence, the notion of ownership of your data and being careful what you share with your environment, that goes back to the concept of responsibility that I alluded to earlier. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And one last thing. Well, I was burdened with the special responsibility to choose the one who win the book. So I did some consultancy, internal consultancy, and we decided that the gentleman with the glasses, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but the questions regarding how they use the artificial intelligence tool was interesting. So everybody had something to say about that, so that was the good question. So thank you for the winner, and thank you for our guests.